Well, let's get started. Just to respect everybody's time, and I'll say welcome to everybody. Thanks for being on today. Looks like we might have a smaller group. If we don't fill the hour, I don't know that we've ever really ran short, but if we don't, that's okay. We'll let you have some time back in your day. And normally I spend a little bit of time talking about some items. I will do that. But if you see Jen Smith's box on the screen today, she's coming to us from her car at the Capitol, because there's this little thing called the school aid budget, and there's some things going on with MIPSers, and she's been seemingly busy getting yelled at by all kinds of people that are powerful, as she advocates on behalf of some things for us. So I want to give Jen the opportunity to share what's happening on the Capitol on budget and MIPSers, just in case she either has to leave for a meeting or somebody else calls her and wants to yell at her. So, and hopefully it's not our members doing the yelling. So Jen, if you want to first talk legislatively, and once you've talked and had questions answered, then we'll jump into some things for Brad and I.
All right. So you've seen the alerts. I hope you've answered them, but we have been pushing for weeks now to take the $670 million that the governor proposed removing from MIPSers, and she spread it throughout the budget. We have proposed putting it right back into the system and using it to buy down the rate. We have a bill. It's House Bill 5803. I don't think it's in the alert that's out there right now. We just haven't had a chance to update yet. But I would recommend, even if you've called, call again. Larissa put the link to the alert in the chat. But House Bill 5803 is sponsored by Representative Kolazar. There's a companion bill in the Senate, 911, sponsored by Senator Hertel. But we're targeting the House right now to try to get the bill out of the House today, if we can, Thursday at the latest. If we can get it out this week, it goes to the Senate on Tuesday. They can pass it. We can have it done before the end of the fiscal year. And then we'll see what happens with the governor. So under this bill, it would lower the rate from 20.96 that you pay now to 14.3. I might be off. So we'll say 21-ish to 14-ish. It's 6.4%. That is what House Fiscal has determined the $670 million will buy at 6.4%. That would be an immediate savings to your district because the rate would change and you get to keep that money in the classroom instead of sending it back to the state for retirement. This has garnered a lot of support because it makes a lot of sense and it means a lot of money to districts. If you're not sure, check with your business official. They can probably tell you what a more than 6% cut would mean per pupil, but on average, it's $450 per pupil across the state. So it's a lot of money that could go back into districts. The pushback we're getting comes mostly from the governor's office. Last week, we sent a letter because they're also trying to move an economic development plan that runs right about that same amount of money. It's $600 million. And after a not so good meeting with the budget office, the 12 or so organizations that have been pushing this, it's all the management statewide and the unions, AFT and MEA, we've all been behind this. We sent a letter that not so subtly tied the $670 million she wants to pull out of MIPSers to the $600 million of general funds she wants to use, or they want to use in SOAR. Because we know when the general fund gets pressure, the school aid fund pays for it. So it wasn't a hard connection to make, but it was not a welcome connection by some people. So while it was our nuclear option, it got us in the room. It showed our intent and our seriousness behind this proposal and the fact that management and unions are standing together. So that letter went out last week, and the next day we got an all call to the principal's office, and we all showed up to meet with the speaker. The speaker was less than thrilled with us, and waved the letter around, slammed it on the table, told us to fix it, and walked out. Since that meeting, he has reached back out to talk about how we can do this. So there's a small group of our bigger coalition that is doing all these meetings. So they met with him on Friday afternoon. and explained 5803 is how we do this. And we get questions all the time about where in the budget are we going to give up money if we put the money there? And the answer is we don't have to. And there are places that if we're given $500 more per pupil, we can pay for things that we don't need line items for. So it's kind of an apples to apples thing. Like, what will you give up to get this? We don't think that's the conversation. So we are full court press today, hence me sitting in the car. That, and I forgot my earbuds, so I couldn't sit inside. But we're full court press today on 5803. I encourage all of you, when you're off of this, make those calls, have your friends and family make those calls. If we can get that bill moving, it will put even more pressure on getting this done and getting us closer to the budget being finished as well, because that's the other thing, that's their new threat today, is that they will not finish the budget as long as we're pushing this bill. And again, all of the groups have said, okay, then let's finish this bill. Because as soon as that bill goes into effect, the rate is lower and you don't have to pay all that money. If the budget gets delayed because we're trying to fix this bigger issue, this huge dollar issue, so be it. These people are not going to go out on the campaign trail without a budget. So we don't feel like this is truly a solid threat, but it's the threat that's coming down. It's why I might have to jump off, as one of the members is calling each one of us from the organizations to tell us to knock it off. But we are solid in our support for this bill. MEA, AFT, right there with us, lockstep. We have been eating lunch together and hanging out together, and it freaks people out around the Capitol. But it's a big thing. This will be a huge win for districts if we could get that rate permanently lowered. The other pushback we've gotten from some Republicans that follow Tom Albert, Senator Albert's thing is that this isn't our money to spend on anything. It needs to go into paying down the debt. And while that also makes sense, the permanent rate reduction means no matter who's governor next, you're still only paying 14 point whatever percent. If they put the money into the debt and we hit hard times, they can mess with that and what gets paid and what doesn't. And pretty soon we're not done in 2038, we're done in 2045, whatever the case may be. We've seen this happen year after year after year when there have been issues. They play around with how we deal with MIPSers. So while Albert isn't wrong, his idea that this is better for the system is misguided. Not making districts pay into a system that they have already paid off, the healthcare part, making schools continue to pay the same amount when a huge part of the debt is gone, that's where we think the real benefit for schools is, and the benefit of the system. It will not harm the system. We will continue to pay into the pension side. We'll continue to pay off that debt that is supposed to be done by 2038. But districts get relief. And the piece that I forgot to mention is staff gets relief. Some of your staff are paying 3% into the healthcare system. This would end that 3% payment because the healthcare system is fully funded. So this is our big push today. This is the big deal. There's lots of little things going on. Happy to answer any of those questions, but this is our main focus right now. And I just strongly encourage you, even if you have already called, call again, give the bill number, urge quick action on this. Because of the constitutional 5-day rule, you can't pass a bill. It has to sit in each chamber for the first time for 5 days. So the House has got to get this out this week, or we're not going to get it as the legislature looks to adjourn before 4th of July. I'll stop there. There's so much more I could say, but I'll stop there and take any questions. Don, I can't see the chat, so if you can.
I didn't figure. So one question that's on here, Jen, are you seeing a difference between the House and Senate as far as leaning towards support? Is one body more supportive than the other? Or? We've
been dealing with the House so much more, but the approach chairs in both chambers are supportive. The K-12 approach chair, Representative Weiss, is the one who started us down this path by putting it in her budget. One of the Democratic caucus members grabbed me on the street today to say, you wouldn't believe what happened in caucus. Like, people are frustrated and sad that we can't just do this and the governor will sign off. So we think the support within that caucus is strong. But that is basically our duty today is whip counting. So that's where all of your phone calls matter. Because if they hear it from all of you, then when I pull them, they're going to be like, oh, your board members keep calling me. And I love when they get mad that I have fired up my board members. But that support from the district really does help. We don't have good counts on the Republicans yet. And we know that Hall won't share his counts until it goes up on the board. He's not going to let the Dems know whether or not the caucus is with it just because of the games that they play. But the Republicans we've talked to so far have all been on board as well. So I think this passes overwhelmingly.
House Bill 5803 is the.
Yes, that is the Colazar bill that we're pushing today.
All right. You mentioned budget, Jen, and for just kind of those, I think most of the people that are on today are more seasoned folks, but I mean, the threat on not passing the budget, I mean, it's June. School districts have already passed their budgets. They don't typically do an amendment in July or August based on the budget getting done. If they're going to do an amendment, it's later in the year. So the threat in some ways, as it relates to actually impacting a district, is a pretty hollow threat. Districts already passed a budget based on make-believe numbers anyways. Right. So it's just the nature of what boards do every year.
And the other piece of that is that when I've sat in legislative offices and said, you need to pass the school budget by June 30th, I have gotten pushback to say, oh, schools have dealt with this before. So now that they're throwing it at us, I'm like, well, schools have dealt with this before. And again, if we get this bill through and it gets immediate effect, you get money today. You don't have to wait for September 1 or October 1 for the new appropriations to kick in. You don't have to wait for your new per pupil. It will kick in right away because you're not paying 20.96 on your payroll. So it makes that argument extremely hollow. And the idea that this is an election year, both presidential and our House. And to send members out into the summer without a school aid budget because they're concerned about putting $670 million into schools is not a politically good place to be. So I think they're just picking at whatever they can grab. But right now, our biggest issue is the governor's office. I think that we can get this through as long as we can get it moving. I think the momentum will carry it. And all of the force of our organizations and our members will help. But it's the governor's office is the biggest sticking point.
Jen, you can't see chat, but you're getting kudos for the work that you're doing as well. Questions, other questions for Jen on this topic, and you can throw them in chat in a few later if something comes to your mind as well. I'm not seeing anything pop up, Jen, so let's see. One question, Jen, is there a potential for compromise where a partial amount goes to the budget and maybe another amount goes into MIPSers or into the change?
It's a possibility, but at this point, because we know we have the support of both approach chairs and pretty solid majorities in both chambers, we're not willing to have that conversation yet. And even with the four groups that have sort of been the key negotiators on this, the meetings that they have been called into with the budget office have not been true negotiations. They've not been an attempt to find a middle ground. So until all the parties are willing to negotiate in good faith, there's no reason for us to back off asking for all of it. And especially if we get 5803 moving, it'll show the legislature is there too. And that's going to put even more pressure on the budget negotiators, the Senate, the House, and the governor to include it and get the budget done.
Jennifer, I just really appreciate, and there's plenty of this going on in chat too, so I hope somebody captures it for you, but I just really appreciate the political savvy that you bring to bear on behalf of public schools and all the work you're doing. I just texted my representative, so we'll see.
Thank you, Stan.
All right, thanks, Jen. And as I said, if there's other questions that pop up while Jen's still on, throw them in the chat and we'll get them answered for you. First thing that
Can I add one more thing?
you can.
Just from the advocacy side, if you have talked to your rep, as I said, call them anyway. If you talk to your senator, call them anyway. If they're on your side, call them anyway. Give them the bill number, give them the firepower they need to talk to their caucus members. And if they're against you, call them anyway with the bill number and the idea that this has got support. You need to look at it from the other side. So no matter what your excuses for not calling them, I just took them all away. So be sure you're sharing that bill number and pushing for support of that in the House this week and the Senate next week.
Is there any value in contacting the governor's office, Jen?
Yes and no. The reason I say no is because your call will go into the Constituent Services Center and then we'll have to get logged and passed along. But yes, because it will get logged and passed along. I would never say no to contacting any elected official, but just know that that's probably where you're going to get directed is to constituent services. But I think it can be worth the call, especially if you can give them numbers. You know, I'm calling from, I think Stan, you put in the chat, I'm calling from Mona Shores and it's $1.5 million a year continually. It's not a one-time thing. And so I think if we can, you know, maybe fill her call log with these, maybe we get some attention, but just know that you're not going to get to the decision makers or even those departments. You're not going to be able to contact the budget office. But it's still there. It's still recorded.
All right. First item that I want to bring up, we were brainstorming today as staff as we look at the September issue of Leaderboard. And one of the things as we think about board turnover this fall and, you know, done January 1 new board members, one of the things that came up is student board members that, you know, are your student representatives that serve as board members for many of you. And so if you could all raise your virtual hand if you have student reps on your school board. I know you all treat them differently in what they can do, but if we can get hands, we're thinking about having an article and leave them up for me. I guess we're probably, well, actually, Larissa, we're recording this, so I don't probably need to write down every person. We can pull it off of what we can see from the recording. That'll save me time. I keep them up though, just so that we, for a little bit here. And part of this is just, we're thinking about maybe having one of our articles, really getting some idea of what students have thought about their experience, what they think is maybe could have been things that would have improved their experience, to be able to share that out with the members, just so that you know, we know. And I know some of you do feedback with your members when they're done at the end of each year. And I'm looking to see, oh, Michael, that's interesting. I didn't know they did a National Student Board virtual conference in August. So that's good to know. We did for a couple of years, we had a conference for boards that were interested in for student board members. And we just didn't have we just couldn't get good turnout. It was, you know, get about 40 people and that was about it, and maybe 35 the next year. But we do know from talking to boards that it's typically a pretty positive impact for the students that are on there. And I know we actually have some members that were student board members that are now school board members today. And I know that's a little bit a part of it as well. So you guys can put your hands down. You don't need to keep them up in case that way I don't get confused if you actually have questions on other topics. So that's one topic. Probably don't need a reminder, but I'll give one anyways. Election filing deadline is just over a month away. I'm assuming for most of you, you've figured out already who's running and who's not as far as on your board. I see some no shaking, so should have some conversations about that. just making sure that you're getting people to file. Brad and I were talking before, and one of the question that he had received recently, and Larissa just put election resources link on the Get On Board campaign for you all. But it was a transparency question that he had received, longtime board member, deciding not to run again, and whether the board and the district should really, how transparent, how much should they communicate that? We've talked about that here, and truly, our view is that, whether it's a 2-year board member or a 20-year board member, if they're not choosing to run again, the earlier that you know, and the earlier that you can let your different communities within your school district know about that, the more opportunity it gives you as a board to go out and recruit based on what strengths that you need on your board. To me, I equated it to a bond issue, right? Like, people that are going to vote no on a tax increase are going to show up to vote. Doesn't matter if you decide not to advertise it or not. And I think similarly, if you have a group of people in your community that's unhappy with the board, they're not respecting the fact that somebody has 20 years of experience. And if they're mad, and they're going to run regardless of that incumbent has decided to or not. But if you don't have the advance notice to be able to put it out there and attract other people to run, you will have people that won't run because they think Stan Miller is deciding to run again, and he's been there a long time and he's a good guy, so I'm not going to file. So the earlier that you can let people know, I truly think the better off districts are. Those that want to run against you are going to do it one way or the other. So I think clearly we want to make sure that we kind of advertise that. Let's see, I'm just looking at Michael says,
looking for, John?
give a talk to interest community member every 2 years. This year was a disappointing turnout. Well, I mean, it's probably not a surprise, Michael, right? Like, where politics on boards have been during COVID and after, at least in some communities, we have done surveys over the years with Epic MRA, and even before COVID, before COVID was the last time that we did this survey. Before COVID, the number one reason people in Michigan choose not to run for school board is because they think it's too political. And that's not DNR political, it's just community political, right? So that was before any of the culture war stuff and COVID that they were thinking that. So not surprising that we're seeing this. Now, I will say we've now ran, I think, 2 of 6 or 4 of 8 of our town hall meetings. I think we've got 4 left, 1 yet this week. I think we're getting good turnout in those. So there are people interested in running. I had a conversation actually yesterday with the current president and incoming president for the Michigan PTA. They're going to be sending out something in the next week to their members to consider running and advertising those town hall meetings so that they can learn what it means to be a board member and, hear that before they decide if they want to file or not, so that they're not getting into something that they're completely surprised by. But so anyways, I think that is, your experience, though, the fact that you get out there and let the community know is a good thing, even if in this year we're seeing you saw a dip in that participation. Brad, like other things on the election side of things that you might want to touch on, that you're hearing from members or from anybody else?
During this time, a lot of the questions involve vacancies that are possibly expected this summer, or vacancies that you've had after the last election, and how that vacancy could impact your upcoming ballot. And I don't remember if I covered this issue at the last Member Matters webinar, but
Nope.
The key date to remember is July 16th. If you have a vacancy that occurs before that date, and there are going to be years remaining on that vacated term, say that's the vacated term is going to expire in 26, then you appoint the individual to that vacancy to the 24 election. If the vacancy occurs after July 16th, then that appointee serves all the way until the 2026 election. So if you have any long-serving board members that are thinking about resigning, if they have years remaining on their term, after the 24 election, you can kind of be strategic about when that individual resigns. And, if they resign after that July 16th date, then the board gets to appoint someone all the way until the 26 election, not just until the 24 election. And, worse more is that if you have a vacancy that occurs, July 10th or the 14th, and then there's very little time for folks to file for that vacancy. And a lot of people have already filed for, I shouldn't say file for the vacancy, but file for the abbreviated term that's going to be on the ballot as a result of that vacancy. And that could really complicate your elections. So if you have anybody in that boat, that's thinking about resigning this summer, have them resign after July 16th. It makes it a little easier, in terms of keeping your board consistent.
Good point. Any, just from the audience, any election questions that you have for either Brad or I, anything in that space before we kind of switch topics? And please, if you have topics that you want to bring up or throw out to the group to say, hey, we're dealing with this. Nick, I see a hand.
Yeah, is there, with the last election, here in Northern Kent County, we had a huge influx of outside PAC money. And I wondered if there's any just simple advice, from you or Brad or Jen or anybody on that, because the pressure, my term is up at the end of this year and my seat is on, and I've been approached, and I'm adamantly, I don't like this running as PAC thing, and I don't like seeing mailers from the MEA, and we're a little more disorganized here in Kent County on the red side, so you don't get any mailers like that. But just any advice on that, because I don't think it's going away. I'm disheartened by it, but I'm just curious if you have any quick advice on how one might, if they decide they want to do that, how they might approach that, and any warnings you might have.
Yeah, Nick, that's a great question, and I share the same sentiments. I, like, as an association, I don't care if it's left or right, but like, we would prefer not to have the parties or kind of culture war issue PACs getting involved in school board election. We don't think it ends up in anywhere good. I will say, maybe on the positive note, most states had their elections for school boards in 2023. We're an anomaly, being an even election year state. It did seem like across the other states, there was somewhat of a reduction from 2 years ago in the number of outside folks that were involved in the elections. I really hope that we see the same thing here in Michigan, that we see maybe a downturn from what we saw 2 years ago. Because we said districts with mailers that were, looked like it was a legislative campaign based on the kind of quality and amount of money spent. And it's the process. There's nothing that we can do to stop it. MASB has been asked in the past to present to groups about being a board member, but they're partisan groups, and we've declined, saying, like, we do not want to be seen taking sides in any of this. We don't think that the political parties should be involved in this, and it's not always the parties. Sometimes it's like fringe groups that are, asking. So, I think the difficulty, though, is if you're a candidate, and the question that you have to start asking yourself, like you do with many questions when you're voting on a board, is like that greater good question. If I agree with this group, do I take some of their money because I already agree with them, but that's means I'm taking a side? It seems like that's going to be the rub when money starts playing a bigger role in some school board races. And it will, like in some districts, and others it'll never happen. In other districts it'll happen. And ultimately, I think each candidate's going to have to make that decision. And it's hard. You explain to people, like, legislatively, having worked in the process, there's very few legislators that take money from PACs, where the PAC is in essence buying their vote. Like they already agreed with the PAC before the money came in. That's why they got the PAC money. But many people in your community view that as like dirty, right? Like somehow they're aligning. And so the same people could think the same thing about school board members. If you were whatever, let's say you're going to ban books and that's what you were supportive of, and a PAC that was supportive of that wrote you a check, like I could see where people would, view that as like, oh, that's, buying a vote. Well, I was already there. So I do think that's a tough space to be in. I'm hoping to see less of the politics. It's a little bit too early to tell and this year to see whether it's going to be there or not. That's a good point, Mark. Yeah, and the other problem is once PACs get involved, the elections become more expensive and it takes more of the average citizen out of this. My district in Grand Ledge 2 years ago had a couple of flyers go out and clearly they were, people had to spend money. Like, I don't know who the groups were necessarily, and they got ugly. I mean, there was one bringing up like one of the candidates' divorces and like different things. I mean, it got pretty ugly. And you would have thought it was, like I said, a legislative campaign. I mean, hopefully we don't see that again. Stan.
Well, as I said in
You're on
the
a new
chat,
topic.
yeah, I'm on a new topic. So finish this one if anybody's got anything else.
Any other
No.
thoughts for Nick on the politics and PACs in your district? I don't know if anybody's experienced it directly that can shed some light, but hopefully, Nick, that helped a little bit. Stan, new topic.
New topic. So yesterday we voted on MASB membership at our regular meeting, and it passed. But there was a question about how the insurance savings are calculated. And this is, it's a number I've seen every year, and I've just never thought to wonder about it. But one of our board members is an insurance guy, and he says, I don't know where they got that number because there could be lots of providers. So how do we know we can trust that number? Any insight?
That's a good question, Stan. And I actually, we do not create that number. That is the amount of statewide savings, and SETSEG, depending if it's workers' comp or property casualty, they handle each of them differently. So that number is provided to us through SETSEG. In one case, it actually is a check that the district receives back. And so you could ask your business office very easily, how much was the check that we received last year from SETSEG? And I can't remember if that's workers' comp or property casualty. I believe it's workers' comp. And it's not a rebate, but it's maybe like an overage of premium or something. I'm not sure the technical term. PC is handled, I think, differently on that. But so we don't create those numbers. Those come directly from SETSEG. Some of that is based on the checks received back from districts. So that's a very solid number returned statewide. That's not one to argue with. I just don't know how the other one it comes up.
I think this was the workers' comp number in particular.
And I think that is actually based on the checks returned to districts each year.
Well, that's fascinating. That's I'm going to email my business officer and.
Yep, there's a check that, and we've used, even if you don't look at the other savings, when we've talked about MASB's dues, that often is the case. Like one of the things, right, you have access to SETSEG as an insurance product, and let's say your dues are, $8,000 and you've received a check back on the workers' comp fund for $14,000. The math works out pretty well that and by itself covers it, even if you didn't use MASB for anything else.
Yeah. And, there were several of us who were making points like that. And if we had to pay Miller Johnson or Troon for every time that we email or call Brad, that would cover the cost also. So So thanks for that. I'll do a little digging and see what I can learn.
Yeah,
And
I appreciate that question. I mean, I think this is, I mean, we know a lot of districts are going through it right now. And, you know, I never want members to stay only because of SETSEG. I want them to see value in the organization. I mean, you know, your numbers stand, right? So Jen is along with others, but it's a battle of numbers. So Jen's working hard on making a change in MIPSers. It's $1.5 million a year for Mona Shores.
Yeah.
If she is successful and that group is successful, like, yep, if you dropped out, would it still happen because MASA and we'll still be lobbying? Yes. Until the point that too many people drop out and then legislators ignore the association because they don't think we actually speak for all of our members. Like that's where the rub comes in. So, that's where it's really, I think, helpful. Let me see.
Jen says when, not if. And I had a related question actually about MASB membership and the vote on that. And this is for Brad. I am now a consultant for MASB. And so I abstained from that vote yesterday, citing a financial conflict of interest. And I want to know if I erred on the side of caution or if that was the right thing to do.
No, that's the right thing to do, Stan, because arguably, you know, you have an interest in that the vote, and it's a financial transaction. So the conflict of interest law applies to contracts and financial transactions, like approving MASB membership as a financial transaction. So, you know, if you have a direct or indirect interest to that financial transaction, that's per the board. I would interpret section 1203 of the code to require you to disclose and abstain. So you did the right thing.
Okay. Thank you. It was a little bit dicey because we only had 5 members there yesterday. And one of them was the guy questioning where this insurance number came from and whether we can really trust it and is it really worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if he had voted no, we would have had to reconsider next month.
Glad you got the 4 votes.
Mark posted a question, and it's not really to me. It's about to all of you. I see Mary just did a good response, so you can respond in chat. I think that's a good idea, but it's really about onboarding, suggestions about onboarding a new superintendent in their first few months. So if you have ideas, please post them in chat. It is that the first, I say 3 to 6 months is really, really important on the success of that superintendent, right? Like they need to know what the expectations are, what the communication expectations are, set some goals, even if they're like midterm, easy, you know, like, because you go through an interview process, you get selected as the superintendent, and often that superintendent is picking up cues during the interview process about things that are happening at the district. There, you know, maybe you've had some financial issues, maybe you've had some curriculum and achievement issues, and separate from any conversation with the board and setting goals and doing other things, they're going to start running as they would. They're high achieving people that want to fix the problems that they perceive are real. And so they start doing their thing. And you don't want to find out as a superintendent 6 months later that even though you knew that there was a student achievement issue, the board's expectation wasn't that you were going to jump in that. They were expecting you were going to jump into something else, but it never got communicated. So, you know, anything that you can share in that regard. I think what was mentioned here, the mentor program for new first-time superintendents, MASA really runs a good program for superintendents. They have MASB participate in a day of that on working with your board. I would encourage that you always get a new superintendent to participate in that PD. They should also participate in the county soups meetings. A lot of them are new soups are going to be like, I feel like I have to be in the district and I can't leave. I need to be there and be seen. Well, that's true, but you can't shortchange your learning opportunities. And in many ways, that learning from your local superintendents is as important as anything is that you're doing in the district as well. So keep throwing things out there. I think that makes it's very helpful for people to do that. Well, we just talked about superintendents. Another issue that Brad had a couple of people bring up to him this week, and I'll frame it, and then if Brad wants to chime in too. So some school boards are hearing from during superintendent contract negotiations about some language to insert in superintendent contracts related to challenges to their compensation related to MIPSers. So you're aware, we've talked about it, I think, on Members Matters. So there's been a lot of litigation that's ongoing. We have been a part of it from a filing briefs perspective, where MIPSers or ORS is disallowing certain compensation from being counted towards a superintendent's retirement. Now, as an organization, we've had a long-standing resolution on this, like for years, like probably 10 years it goes back, where we believe it's the board's job to set compensation for their superintendent. And if you believe it's compensation, that compensation should also be considered by ORS as compensation for the purposes of retirement. Like, I think that most boards have that expectation. If we're paying you whatever way it is we're paying you, that you will also, that will be, turned into retirement income for that individual. And Brad posted something, the actual language. And we are fighting in court really to make sure that ORS is, counting whatever compensation boards choose to also count. We have some ISD boards that are joining with us on the amicus briefs that have been filed, because we're viewed as the employer. MASB is not the employer, but we represent the employer and all of you. And so we are 100% behind making sure that ORS counts the compensation. The language that Brad posted would, in essence, say that if a challenge is made by ORS to this compensation of your individual superintendent, that you, in fact, will appeal that decision. And it would be, binding because it's in the contract. That's a place where we do think it's your decision whether you put that language in or not. But I would say we probably have some concerns as we think about, you're doing that today as a board. What about the boards tomorrow? But Brad, I'll let you talk a little bit more about it, but we do not dispute the issue at all. We're 100%. We've spent a lot of money defending the soups and their compensation and your ability to do that. But we do have some concern about having this stuck in contracts.
Yeah, it's kind of an undefined liability. And you compare it to, an indemnification clause. We don't advise to have language in a contract that says the board shall indemnify the superintendent on any legal matter that comes up within the superintendent's roles and responsibilities. We will encourage a board to purchase errors and liability insurance or insurance that would cover litigation for the superintendent, but saying that you're going to indemnify any claim, and I think that's undefined liability as well. So that's kind of my concern, and again, as Don said, it's a local decision, but certainly something that needs to be discussed by your board and the impact that it could have. And another issue that's been coming up as well with contract negotiations is the language for appealing an evaluation. MASB has kind of provided some simple language that it will just be appealed, to a third party at the agreement of the board and the superintendent, and the board can even pay for the services of that third party. Hearing an evaluation appeal that is less than effective. I'm not sure if I'm on board of a lengthy process, that has that evaluation going to arbitration, where you have an arbitrator involved in interpreting the contract and the evaluation requirements under law and whether the board met those requirements. So that's another issue I've been getting questions on, as boards look at extending their superintendent contracts in June and beyond the July 1 timeframe when they usually expire.
Well, and one thing I'll add, Brad, I know you've covered this in the past, but on that contract or evaluation issue, it's one of the reasons why it's really important that you can point as a board and as a district that all 7 board members have went through the training on whatever tool that you're using, because now that this appeal language is in law, like that's not that, like, so it's there, they have the right to appeal. If all of a sudden this goes through and you've had 2 or 3 board members voting on the evaluation that didn't go through training, like you really open yourself up to a challenge on that if the score that you give your superintendent doesn't, meet his or her expectations. So that's another reason why with this new appeal language in law that you have to have some process, that you want to make sure that all 7 people are getting that training. I don't care what tool you're using, if it's ours or somebody else's, but it's become now more important that the training happens.
I agree. Yeah, I think that would be the main thing. A superintendent would likely appeal if you have a board member that just doesn't want to get trained, and that the rating for that individual is somewhat lower than the 6 other board members who were trained.
Brad, I'm going to throw you one more question. We're about 10-2 right now. Where I know that the feds have come down with new language related to Title IX. I've read that certain parts of the country are saying, put a hold on this. Other parts are saying we have to comply. Like, what is your kind of legal interpretation for districts in Michigan right now with the new Title IX regulations?
Yeah, so as of today, for Michigan school districts, your deadline is August 1st to be in compliance with the new Title IX regulations. Just in a webinar yesterday that was presented by Neola on the policies that they will be providing to ensure that districts will be in compliance with the new regulations. I'm sure all the law firms that do policies for school districts will be issuing their updated policies on Title IX in the near future. So as of today, that August 1st deadline has not changed for Michigan school districts. There are multiple states that are challenging the regulations and claiming that the Department of Education went beyond its scope of authority in issuing these regulations and interpreting Title IX to a point where it no longer achieves the congressional intent of the language that was passed by Title IX and passed by Congress in the early 1970s. But Michigan is not involved in any of those lawsuits, and until a decision involves Michigan or possibly a decision makes it to the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals or possibly the Supreme Court that puts those regulations in abeyance for Michigan districts, they'll plan on that August 1st deadline for compliance.
All right, I appreciate that. I know that's an issue, and it can be, of course, a political bone of contention in communities as well. So,
and Neola and I'm sure all the other policy providers are staying in tune with all those lawsuits. So you can assure if there's any changes as a result of the lawsuits in terms of impacting the policies that you're going to be approving in the future, you will hear from your policy provider on that.
any other topics that are that the listeners, all of you have, that you might want to touch base on, questions that are coming up in your district that Brad or Jen or I might be able to address for you? Got a few minutes left in this. Well, if I don't see any, I will Kurt's asking, Jen, any other new developments on the school aid budget beyond what you talked about?
No. We heard that they were setting budget targets last weekend, but we haven't seen anything for school aid. And judging by the threats that were coming in today, they don't have a school aid budget put together. So much of it depends on whether or not the 670 can be spent in the budget or is going to be spent back on the rate reduction. So stay tuned, but until this fight is over, I'm not sure we'll see anything budget wise.
I did hear back from my state rep He said, thanks for the note. It looks like it's currently in the Appropriations Committee.
That's not an answer. Push harder.
No, it's not. So I went back to him and I said, you know, okay, but we're all behind this and we need the House to pass it this week.
Yeah, it's more interested in where he or she is, not
Mhm,
telling you where a bill might be.
mhm.
Who's your state rep, Stan?
Van Workum?
I'll add him to my list.
One thing I'll mention, and just more of a sneak preview without giving you a lot of information. So, kind of ties in, Stan, you were talking about our membership and our dues. We're launching a program, membership appreciation program in July that you'll all see, and hopefully it will be something, including the board member that you have, Stan, that was asking those questions, that you'll see that there's a little, hopefully a little bit coming back to you as districts to take advantage some of MASB services and programs without it costing you the money that it currently costs you. We're looking for a way with our board to show appreciation for our members in our 75th year of existence. So we'll be launching a program in July to recognize members and help you out in that space. So stay tuned on that. We are 5 minutes before 1 and want everybody to enjoy your summer. I know we're coming up on the 4th of July in a couple weeks. So thank you all for doing what you're doing. Hopefully all of you are running again for your board if you're up for election. And I guess I will let you all go and hope that you have a great day.